The wedding drums were loud, but her heart was louder. Ava stood frozen in the middle of the crowded courtyard, her small hands trembling as someone adjusted the red tapata over her head. She was too young to understand everything, but she knew one thing clearly. This wasn't what she wanted. Just hours ago, she had been sitting quietly in the corner of a big house, watching her mother scrub floors like she did every day. Now, everything had changed. Voices were louder. Faces were unfamiliar, and the word marriage kept echoing around her like something heavy and unkind. Her mother, Sarah, avoided her eyes. That hurt more than anything. Sarah had worked as a maid her entire life, raising Ava alone after being abandoned years ago. She had always promised her daughter a better future, one filled with school, laughter, and dreams bigger than the small servant quarters they lived in. But today, something was different. Fear had replaced hope in her eyes. It wasn't just poverty pushing this decision. It was pressure, something deeper, something she wasn't saying. And then there was him, the man Ava was being forced to marry. He stood near the gate, quiet and distant, dressed in simple clothes that marked him as nothing more than a mechanic. His hands were rough, stained with grease, and his posture showed no excitement, no pride. If anything, he looked reluctant. His name was Armin, and people whispered that he fixed broken engines in a small roadside workshop. Not rich, not educated, not someone anyone would dream of marrying their daughter to, unless they had no choice. But something about him didn't fit. He wasn't looking at Ava like others were, like she was a burden being passed on. Instead, there was a strange calmness in his eyes, almost like he understood more than he was letting on. Ava noticed it, and for a brief second, through all her fear, she felt something else, confusion. Why would a man like him agree to this? As the ceremony moved forward, the tension grew heavier. Neighbors whispered. Some pitied the young maid's daughter being forced into such a life. Others simply watched, as if this was just another story that would fade by tomorrow. But this story was different, because hidden beneath Armin's quiet presence was a truth no one in that courtyard could even imagine, a truth that could change everything. As the final moment of the ceremony approached, Ava's eyes met his again. This time, he didn't look away. Instead, he gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod, as if telling her to trust him. Trust him? How could she? And yet, something inside her said this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning, because the man everyone saw as a poor mechanic was hiding a secret worth millions. The ceremony ended, but the silence between them only grew louder. Ava sat quietly in the corner of the small room she had just been brought into. It didn't feel like a home. The walls were plain, the furniture old, and the faint smell of oil hung in the air. Somewhere outside, she could hear the distant clinking of tools, reminding her that this place belonged to a mechanic, a life she had never imagined for herself. Armin didn't speak much on the way here. He had walked ahead, carrying the small bag that held all of Ava's belongings, as if it weighed more than it should. Not once did he try to force conversation. Not once did he look back with impatience. That, more than anything, made Ava uneasy. Why was he being so careful? She glanced at him now. He stood near the door, his back slightly turned, as if unsure whether to stay or leave. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something, but then he simply let out a quiet breath and stepped outside. Ava was alone again. Her mind drifted back to her mother, Sarah's trembling hands, the way she couldn't meet her eyes, the quiet tears she tried to hide. This wasn't just about poverty. Ava knew that now. Something had forced her mother into this decision. Something serious enough to give away her own daughter without a fight. But what? A faint memory crossed her mind. Voices from the big house where her mother worked. Angry voices. The rich family she served had been arguing for days. Ava remembered hearing a name mentioned more than once, something about money and a mistake that couldn't be forgiven. And then suddenly, this marriage had been arranged. It didn't feel like a coincidence. Outside, Armin stood under the dim light near his workshop. His expression was no longer calm. The quiet mask he wore in front of everyone had slipped, revealing something much heavier underneath. Pressure, maybe even frustration. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment before finally answering a call. "I've done what you asked," he said in a low voice. "The marriage is done. There was a pause. Whoever was on the other end spoke for a while, their voice too faint to hear. Armin's jaw tightened. "No," he replied firmly, glancing back toward the room where Ava sat today. "She doesn't know anything. And she won't unless you force me to tell her." Another pause. This time his expression changed. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper. Conflict. "You promised this would end after the day," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "I kept my side of the deal. Now you keep yours." He ended the call without waiting for a response. For a few seconds he just stood there, staring into nothing, as if trying to decide his next move. Then he ran a hand through his hair and looked back at the door. Inside, Ava slowly stood up and walked toward the small window. From there, she could see him clearly. The way he held himself. The way he looked at the ground like he was carrying something heavy inside. It didn't match the image of a simple mechanic at all. There was more to him. Much more. And whatever secret he was hiding, it was somehow connected to her mother, to that big house, and to the sudden, forced marriage. Ava felt a chill run through her, because deep down, she realized something that made her heart race even faster. She hadn't been married off to escape a problem. She had been placed right in the middle of one. The night grew quieter, but inside Ava, everything felt louder. She stepped back in the window as Armin walked in again, his face returning to that same calm expression, like nothing had happened outside. For a moment, they just stood there, two strangers tied together by a decision neither of them seemed to fully control. "You can rest," he said gently, keeping his distance. "No one will bother you here." His voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't cold either. It carried something unfamiliar, respect. That confused Ava even more. "Aren't you going to ask me anything?" she finally said, her voice soft but steady. Armin paused. For a second, it looked like he had been expecting that question. "I could," he replied, "but I think you already have too many questions of your own." That answer only deepened the silence between them. Ava sat down slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her dupatta. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" she asked, looking straight at him now. "You didn't look happy, not even for a moment." Armin didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the small table, picked up a glass of water, then set it back down without drinking. It was as if he was buying time. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people agree to things because they don't have a choice." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. "Like my mother?" That question hit something. Armin looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a brief moment, his calm expression cracked. Not fully, but enough for Ava to notice. "You trust your mother?" he asked. "More than anyone." Ava replied without hesitation. "Then trust that she didn't do this to hurt you." The words sounded simple, but they carried weight. Ava wanted to believe them. She really did. But the fear inside her wasn't that easy to silence. "Then tell me what's going on," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "Everyone is hiding something. My mother, even the people in that house. I'm not a child who doesn't understand anything." Armin looked away, and that silence, that refusal to answer, said more than words ever could. Outside, a car slowly passed by the narrow street, its headlights briefly lighting up the room. For a second, Ava noticed something strange. Armin's phone, lying on the table, lit up again. A message. He quickly picked it up, but not before Ava caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't a normal message. It was a name, one she recognized. The same name she had heard whispered in that big house. Her heart skipped. "Why is that name on your phone?" she asked immediately. Armin froze. For the first time, he didn't seem prepared. "It's nothing," he said quickly, but his tone had changed. "It's not nothing," Ava insisted, standing up now. "I've heard that name before. At the house where my mother works. People were scared of him. They said he could ruin lives." The room suddenly felt smaller. Armin clenched his jaw, clearly struggling with something inside. The line between protecting a secret and telling the truth was getting thinner. "You shouldn't get involved in this," he said, his voice firmer now. "It's not safe." Ava let out a small, almost bitter laugh. "I'm already involved. You married me." That landed hard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, from outside, came the low sound of a car stopping right in front of the house. Both of them turned toward the door. The engine switched off. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate. Ava felt her breath catch as she looked at Armin. This time, there was no calm in his eyes. Only tension. Only warning. And as the shadow of someone appeared under the door, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever secret they were trying to keep hidden had just arrived at their doorstep. The knock didn't come right away. That was what made it worse. Ava and Armin stood frozen, staring at the door as the shadow outside shifted slightly. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. It felt controlled, deliberate, like they knew exactly what kind of fear they were creating inside. Then finally, 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not aggressive, but heavy enough to make Ava's chest tighten. Armin exhaled quietly, running a hand over his face as if preparing himself. When he looked back at Ava, his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Whatever happens, don't say anything unless I tell you to." Ava didn't respond. She just nodded, her heartbeat racing. Armin stepped forward and opened the door. A tall man stood outside, dressed neatly, his presence calm but commanding. He didn't smile. His eyes moved past Armin almost instantly, scanning the room until they landed on Ava. And then he stepped inside without waiting for permission. The air in the room changed. "I see everything went as planned," the man said, his tone smooth, almost polite, but there was something underneath it. Control, power. Armin closed the door behind him. "You said this would end tonight." The man gave a faint smile. "It will. That depends on how well you continue to cooperate." Ava felt her stomach drop. "Cooperate?" Her eyes moved between them. "What is this?" "Who is he?" she asked, unable to stay silent anymore. The man turned toward her fully now, studying her face like she was part of the deal he was inspecting. "So this is her," he said softly. "The maid's daughter." Ava straightened slightly, despite her fear. "I have a name." "Of course you do," he replied calmly. "But names don't matter much in situations like this." Armin stepped forward, placing himself slightly between them. It wasn't obvious, but Ava noticed. "She's not part of this," Armin said firmly. "You promised." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Everything is part of this," he replied. "You knew that when you agreed to the marriage." Marriage. The word now felt heavier than ever. Ava's mind raced. This wasn't just about her mother being forced. This was something planned, something calculated. "You used me," she said quietly, looking at Armin. He didn't deny it, but he didn't accept it either. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice tense. "I was trying to fix a problem?" The man interrupted smoothly. "Or to hide something much bigger?" Silence fell again. The tension between them felt like it could snap at any second. The man walked slowly around the room, his fingers brushing lightly against the old furniture, as if none of this impressed him. "Your mother," he said suddenly, glancing at Ava, "made a mistake." Ava's heart stopped. What kind of mistake? A very expensive one. Her throat went dry. What did she do? The man looked at Armin instead of answering. That was enough. Ava turned sharply toward him. "You know, don't you?" Armin's silence was no longer protection. It was confirmation. Before he could speak, the man's phone rang. He answered it without turning away from them. "Yes," he said simply. A pause. Then his expression shifted slightly. Not fear, not surprise, but interest. "I see," he murmured. "So it's already moving faster than expected." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "We're out of time," he said. Armin tensed. "What do you mean?" The man looked at Ava again, this time with something colder in his eyes. "It means," he said slowly, "the truth is no longer something we can keep from her." Ava felt the world around her tilt. Armin took a step forward. "No, that wasn't the deal." "Deals change," the man replied calmly, "especially when millions are involved." Millions. The word echoed in Ava's mind. Her gaze snapped back to Armin, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" Armin's face hardened, the calm mechanic disappearing completely now. In its place was something else, something powerful, something he'd been hiding all along. The man smiled faintly. "Go on," he said to Armin. Tell your wife who you really are. The room felt suffocating. Ava's heart pounded as she stared at the man she had been forced to marry, the man everyone called a simple mechanic. But nothing about him felt simple anymore. And just as Armin opened his mouth to speak, a loud noise came from outside. Not a knock this time. Something sharper, more urgent. All three of them turned toward the door at once. And in that moment, everything changed, because whatever was coming next was about to destroy every secret they had tried to keep hidden. The sound outside came again, this time louder, sharper, like something hitting metal. Not random, not accidental. Armin moved first, instinct taking over. He stepped toward the door, but the man in the suit raised a hand slightly, stopping it without even touching him. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly more serious. This wasn't part of the plan. Ava's breath caught. Plan? What plan? Before anyone could react again, headlights flooded to the thin curtains, brighter than before. Not one car, multiple. The quiet street that felt so small and hidden just minutes ago was no longer empty. Something bigger was happening. Armin's expression changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. "They found us," he muttered under his breath. The man in the suit turned sharply toward him. That's not possible. No one was supposed to track this location. Ava looked between them, her voice trembling but urgent. "Who found you? What is going on?" Neither of them answered her. Outside, car doors slammed shut one after another. The sound echoed like a warning. Then came footsteps, more than one person this time. Fast, coordinated. Ava's heart started pounding even harder. This wasn't just about her forced marriage anymore. This was something dangerous, something far bigger than anything she had imagined. Armin turned toward her quickly. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but intense. "Whatever happens next, stay behind me. Don't trust anyone who walks through that door, not even if they say they're here to help." Ava stared at him. "And I'm supposed to trust you?" That question hit hard. For a second, Armin didn't have an answer. Then he said quietly, "Right now, you don't have a better option." Before she could respond, the door shook violently as someone banged on it from outside. "Open the door!" a voice shouted, firm, demanding. The man in the suit's calm mask cracked for the first time. He stepped back slightly, his eyes narrowing. "This is bad," he said under his breath. "Who are they?" Ava whispered again. Armin didn't take his eyes off the door. "People who don't like losing money," he said. "Money. Millions." The pieces were getting closer, but they still didn't fit. The banging came again, harder this time. "Armin, we know you're inside," the voice shouted. Ava froze. They knew his name. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. "You said you were just a mechanic." Armin let out a breath that sounded more like a quiet surrender than anything else. "I never said I was just that," he replied. The man in the suit gave a short, cold laugh. "Go on," he said. "Looks like your secret doesn't matter anymore." Another loud hit shook the door, the wood cracking slightly at the edge. "Last warning," the voice outside yelled. Armin closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. This time, there was no hesitation left. When he spoke, his voice was different, stronger, clearer. "The truth is," he began, looking directly at Ava, "this marriage was never supposed to happen like this." Ava's chest tightened. "Then what was it supposed to be?" she asked. Before he could answer, the door burst open. The force sent it slamming against the wall, the sound echoing through the small room. Several men stepped inside, their presence sharp and controlled, eyes scanning everything within seconds. But what shocked Ava the most wasn't them. It was who walked in behind them, a familiar face, someone she never expected to see there. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a wave. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The person stepped forward, calm and composed, as if they had been part of this from the very beginning. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," they said. Ava felt the ground beneath her shift, because in that moment, she understood something that made everything even more dangerous. This wasn't just about Armin's hidden identity or a millionaire in disguise. This was about betrayal, and someone she thought she could trust had been playing a much deeper game all along. Ava's breath shook as she stared at the face in front of her. It was her mother. Sarah stepped inside slowly. Her eyes filled with something Ava had never seen before. Not fear, not weakness, but a heavy truth she had been carrying alone. The room fell into a stunned silence. Even Armin looked caught off guard for a moment. "Ma," Ava whispered, her voice breaking. "You brought them here?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter, then at the men behind her, and finally at Armin. The silence said more than words ever could. "I didn't have a choice," she said softly. The man in the suit let out a cold breath. "Everyone keeps saying that," he muttered. Armin stepped forward, his tone firm. "You made a deal with them?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I made a deal to protect her," she said, pointing at Ava. "Everything I did was for her." Ava shook her head, confused and hurt. "By forcing me into a marriage? By sending me here?" Sarah took a step closer. "You don't understand. The money that went missing from that house, they blamed me. They said I stole it. I didn't, but they needed someone to take the fall." Ava's chest tightened. "So this was all about money?" "No," Armin said suddenly. Everyone turned toward him. "This was never just about money," he continued, his voice steady now. "It was about control, about covering up where that money really went." The man in the suit's expression darkened. Careful, but Armin didn't stop. "I agreed to this marriage because it was the only way to get close enough," he said, looking at Ava. "Close enough to prove the truth. I'm not just a mechanic. That workshop is just a cover." Ava stared at him, her mind racing. "Then who are you?" Armin hesitated for a second. Then he answered. "I run a company bigger than anything they've ever dealt with," he said quietly. "The money they're chasing, it was routed through accounts connected to me. I've been tracking it for months." The room shifted. The men who had stormed in looked at each other, uncertain now. "You're lying," one of them said. Armin shook his head. "No, you've been working for the wrong person this whole time." All eyes slowly turned toward the man in the suit. For the first time, he didn't look in control. "This ends now," Armin said firmly. "The truth is already out. Every transaction, every transfer, it's all been recorded. You can't hide it anymore." The tension cracked. The men who had entered began to step back, unsure where they stood now. The power in the room had shifted completely. Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Ava stood frozen, trying to process everything at once. The forced marriage, the hidden millionaire, the truth about the stolen money. It was all unraveling. The man in the suit let out a slow breath, then gave a faint smile. "You really think you won?" he said. Armin didn't respond. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up slightly. "You exposed a money trail," he continued calmly. "But you forgot one thing." Ava felt a chill. "What?" she whispered. The man's eyes moved toward her. "You." The room went silent again. "Every move you made," he said to Armin. "Every step you took to get closer, it all depended on her being here, on this marriage happening." Armin's expression tightened. "And now," the man continued, "she's the only connection left between all of this." Ava's heart started racing again. "What does that mean?" The man smiled faintly. "It means the story isn't over." Before anyone could react, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air outside, loud, growing closer, cutting through the tension. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, his calm returning. "Looks like your backup finally arrived," he said to Armin. "Right on time." Armin didn't move. Neither did Ava. Because even as everything seemed to be coming to an end, one thing didn't feel right. Sarah slowly reached for Ava's hand, holding it tightly. "It's over," she whispered. But Ava wasn't sure. Because as the authorities rushed in and the man in the suit was taken away, he looked back one last time and smiled. Not a defeated smile, a knowing one. And in that moment, Ava realized something that made her heart sink. The forced marriage, the hidden millionaire, the stolen money, none of it had been the real game. She just didn't know what was. The noise slowly faded, but the questions didn't. Ava stood still as everything settled around her. The men taken away, the tension finally breaking, and the small room that once felt like a trap now strangely quiet. Her hand was still in her mother's, but her eyes were fixed on Armin. "You said it's over," she whispered, her voice calm but searching. "Then why does it feel like something is still missing?" Armin didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the door where the man in the suit had disappeared, then back at Ava. There was no more hiding now. "Because he wasn't the top," Armin said quietly. "He was just the one in front." Ava felt that sink in. "So all of this," she said slowly, "the stolen money, the forced marriage, you pretended to be a mechanic, it was all part of something bigger?" Armin nodded. "Yes, but the main network behind it, the one moving that money, it's already been exposed. What's left now are just loose ends, and they don't last long." Sarah let out a shaky breath, her grip on Ava tightening. "So we're safe now?" "For the first time," Armin replied. "Yes." The word safe felt unfamiliar, but comforting. Ava looked at her mother, really looked at her this time. The fear she had seen before was gone, replaced with relief and guilt. "I thought you betrayed me," Ava said softly. Tears slipped down Sarah's face. "I thought I was saving you," she replied. "I didn't know who to trust anymore. They gave me no choice. But I should have told you the truth." Ava took a small step closer and hugged her. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase everything, but it was real. Behind them, Armin watched quietly. After a moment, Ava pulled back and turned toward him. The air between them felt different now, not forced, not strange, just honest. "So what happens now?" she asked. Armin gave a faint smile. "Now we stop pretending." He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, a small key. "That workshop," he said. "It's not what it looks like, and neither is the life I've been living. I didn't plan for any of this to involve you like this, but I won't walk away from it either." Ava looked at the key, then back at him. "You mean the marriage?" Armin didn't look away. "I mean everything." There was no pressure in his words, no force, just a quiet offer. For the first time since all this began, Ava felt like she had a choice. Days passed, and slowly, life began to rebuild itself. The truth about the stolen money came out publicly. Sarah's name was cleared, and the weight she had carried for so long finally lifted. The big house she once worked in no longer held power over her. She was free. Armin's real identity also became known, but not in a loud, flashy way. People whispered about the mechanic millionaire, the man who had hidden his wealth to uncover something deeper. But he didn't seem to care about the attention. He stayed the same, and that mattered. As for Ava, everything had changed. The forced marriage that once felt like a prison had turned into something unexpected, a beginning she never saw coming. Not because of money, not because of secrets, but because, in the middle of all the chaos, she had found truth. One evening, she stood outside the same workshop, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors. Armin walked up beside her, quiet as always. "It's strange," she said, smiling slightly, "how something that started with fear ended like this." Armin nodded. "Life doesn't always give us choices in the beginning, but it gives us something better later." Ava looked at him. "What's that?" "A chance to choose what we do next." She held on to that thought, because in the end, the story wasn't just about a maid's daughter, a forced marriage, or millionaire in disguise. It was about truth finding its way through lies, about courage growing in the middle of fear, and about how even the most unexpected beginnings can lead to something real. And this time, whatever came next, Ava would choose it herself.